the problem is not how long the time period is for the ultimatum. It's the consequences that Trump announced. I don't think the Russians are intimidated by high tariffs on Russian exports to the U.S. since they're so small and in the aggregate really wouldn't have much effect.
As we've been discussing, Keir Starmer's in with the president today, and we'll hear more about that later. The Times says that he's going to use some of his time to press Israel, to get the president to press Israel over humanitarian aid to Gaza and ceasefire negotiations. But will Donald Trump listen? Well, somebody who should know, John Bolton, Donald Trump's former national security advisor. Good afternoon, John. Good morning, I should say.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. The president literally just has been saying that the prime minister has been helpful. He was a bit mysterious about it, but sort of suggested that there are some places where the prime minister's phone call might be more influential than his own. Does Keir Starmer really matter to Donald Trump?
Well, certainly, even as reflected just a few minutes ago, as they were beginning their meeting, I think Starmer has established a very good personal relationship with Trump. I'm not sure I would have necessarily predicted it. It is very hard to predict how Trump reacts to different people. But since Trump himself sees international relations through the prism of personal relations, if he thinks you're his friend, you're a lot more likely to be treated well, to have your ideas received and at least considered. So you have to give Starmer credit for what has been a very difficult task for a lot of other foreign leaders.
He has a rather unusual, well, Trump's got an unusual style in just about everything, hasn't he? One of the first things he did when he landed was to attack the EU and indeed Britain for our policies, or performance, I should say, on migration. He said, illegal immigration is killing Europe. Why don't you do the way we do it, which is to send the troops to the border, etc., etc. It's quite unusual to land and attack your hosts and tell them that they're pretty rubbish, isn't it?
Well, not for Donald Trump. I mean, he is happy to share his opinions anywhere he goes, and I think he hears from people in the UK and from the continent who are concerned about the issue of illegal immigration. And it sounds a lot to Trump like the conditions on America's southern border. And I will say, as in the first term, Trump has basically closed the border to illegal immigration. There's still some coming through, but it proves the power of deterrence. If people think they're not going to be admitted wholesale, they have the good sense not to leave their towns and cities in a fruitless venture. And so it comes naturally to Trump to give other people advice, and that's obviously what he's doing.
Starmer's top agenda item, I think, is probably going to be Gaza. And that's very, very big here because of the scenes we're seeing on our television screens of starving children and so on. How are Americans reacting to those scenes?
Well, I think they're mixed. I think everybody's concerned with the humanitarian issues in Gaza. There's a lot of dispute where the main cause of it is, whether it's Hamas's fault or the UN's fault or Israel's fault. My take would be we're kind of past the point of debate. People aren't going to convince anybody else one way or the other, but it would be in Israel's best interest, if nothing else, to make sure more aid gets in there. I will say there was a very important development from Trump's perspective at the end of last week when Steve Witkoff pulled out of the negotiations for the release of the remaining Israeli hostages taking place in Doha, and basically said that Hamas had not been acting in good faith, which is a pretty remarkable thing for Witkoff to say. I mean, I think he's probably right, but still remarkable that he would say it. And I think that's had an effect on Trump. He just doesn't trust Hamas.
And what's his position with regard to Netanyahu right now?
Well, he hasn't said anything particularly about Netanyahu. I think he would like to have a quote-unquote successful deal, Trump that is, to get the hostages out. And I think he's somewhat impatient with Netanyahu. But in the continuing game of whose fault is it if a Trump deal breaks down, at this moment on the hostage question, it's Hamas that's taking the blame.
We understand he's just suggested that he would reduce the 50-day deadline for Russia to agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine. You know that last week, he gave Putin, I wouldn't say an ultimatum, but gave him this promise. What do you think? Do you believe he's really going to do that?
Well, I think it's possible. I thought that was a pretty noteworthy statement, kind of tossed out at the end of the press scrum right before the meeting began. The problem is not how long the time period is for the ultimatum. It's the consequences that Trump announced. I don't think the Russians are intimidated by high tariffs on Russian exports to the U.S. since they're so small and in the aggregate really wouldn't have much effect. And the other threat of secondary sanctions on purchasers of Russian oil and gas, which would fall primarily on countries like India and China, I think people see as hollow. After all the roundabout on trade issues, to turn on China and India in whether it's 50 days or less than 50 days and suddenly impose major sanctions on them, I don't see that in Trump's game plan.
John, you understand the man's psychology pretty much as well as anybody else, and you've made your view playing in to talk to Starmer. He said a number of things, including that more or less he'd made more peace more times than anybody else ever in the universe. And secondly, that the deal he's just made with the EU is the biggest deal ever. Does he just make this up, or is this what the plan is, to sort of create this world which everybody else has to buy into?
Well, the deal with the EU is a significant deal. It's not the biggest deal in history, but don't worry. When he makes a deal with China, that will be the biggest deal in history, and that's what he's really wanted. This is Trump just sort of making up the world he would like, and other people are free to live in it if they want. It's not connected to reality, but he doesn't really care about that, because if he says it enough times, it becomes reality for him.
John Bolton, thank you. I think that's very perceptive. Thank you, John. That's John Bolton, former National Security Advisor for Donald Trump.
Don't trust Starmer! No, White House pool on here, that's his photographer. What?